As we turn to tonight's recipient of the Theodor Herzl Award, I am reminded of an old Lenny Bruce line that if you are Gentile and you are from New York, you are Jewish. And if you are Jewish and you were raised in Iowa, you are Gentile. That may explain why Colin Powell and I become such good, immediate, and close friends when we worked together at the Pentagon over 30 years ago. May also explain why it wasn't until many years later that I discovered that Colin Powell wasn't actually Jewish. He was raised in the Bronx, where he worked as a teenager in a Jewish-owned store. And he learned more Yiddish than I know. Colin Powell's story is a quintessential American story. From the South Bronx, the son of immigrants, to the highest echelons of power, and serving it all the time through his years in the military and in government with tremendous honor and distinction. 35 years in the U.S. Army, from ROTC to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, serving 5 different presidents, and finally becoming Secretary of State in 2001. If you look over your dinner journal tonight, you will see the tribute letters from former presidents and former secretaries of state, congratulating him on the Herzl Award. But it goes much deeper than that. These dinners always have journals, and tributes are not uncommon. What is uncommon is how revered this man actually is, not just by presidents and government officials. Harry Truman often talked about the great, good common sense of the American people. I believe it is the American public to recognize the quality of this fine man. Colin Powell is truly admired. He is trusted and he is loved. Colin Powell is a great patriot, and the public recognizes this. In 1984, Joe Carroll and I joined Colin and Alma Powell on a Defense Department trip to Israel, the first trip to the Jewish state for all of us. The Israel Defense Ministry and Itzhak Rabin took us across the entire state, and the visit had a huge impact on all of us. To sum it up, Colin Powell is known for his intelligence, his honesty, and his fairness, and for us, his continued commitment to those in our society who do not have the benefits of other people. Instead of using his retirement to go fishing, General Powell has devoted himself to an organization called America's Promise. After serving his country for 5 decades, he is now devoting himself to young people to help them succeed. Colin Powell wants to leave this country a better place. He wants to repair what may be broken, and that in itself is one of the great Jewish values. So it goes back to that. Colin Powell may not be Jewish, but he has a Jewish heart and a beautiful soul. I'm proud to call him my friend. I'm equally proud to bestow on him the World Jewish Congress Theodor Herzl Award for 2017. How'd I do? Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ronald, for those wonderful and gracious words. It's a great pleasure for me to be here this evening, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so pleased to have you all here this evening as well. Let me begin my remarks by adding my congratulations to the late George Stevens for receiving the Theodor Herzl Award. I'm a great admirer of his work, but I'm also a great admirer of his son, George Jr., for all the wonderful and masterful work he has done in the arts over the years, and especially something I'm very familiar with, planning the annual Kennedy Center Honors for so many, many years, and allowing me to be part of that presentation of the Kennedy Center Honors. George, congratulations to you and the whole family. Ron, again, thank you for your generous introduction. I am deeply honored to receive the Theodor Herzl Award from your hands. I'm pleased to join the ranks of the distinguished previous awardees, and especially pleased to receive an award named after the father of Zionism and the founder of the State of Israel. Ron Lauder and Joe Carroll have been dear friends of ours for almost 40 years. As you heard from Ron, we both served in the Reagan administration. We all both came together and watched our children grow up. We shared so many, many family experiences over the last almost 40 years, and we consider them our closest friends. Such closeness made Alma and me aware of the Lauders' commitment to the history, fate, and future of Jewry throughout the world. We watched as they built and restored Jewish schools, places of worship, and cultural institutions in all Europe. We admired their dedication to the welfare of the Jewish people, as well as their fellow Americans, through their philanthropy and their service to mankind. And serving as president of the World Jewish Congress has been at the top of their list. Ron leads the WJC in monitoring and attacking anti-Semitism and all other forms of racism and discrimination that affect our world. He has led this organization with passion and dedication for so many years, and for that, Ronald, I offer my deepest thanks to you for what both you and Joe Carroll have been doing for humankind over the years. God bless you both. The World Jewish Congress was founded in 1936, as you all know. It foresaw and warned the world about what was happening in Nazi Germany. They foresaw evil spreading, and that evil became manifest on Kristallnacht 79 years ago tomorrow. In that night of horror, the world saw it but didn't react to it. They didn't react to the possibility of a greater horror that would subsequently be known as the Holocaust. It was the opening act of unprecedented barbarism that would kill 6 million Jews and millions of other innocent people. As a soldier, I know the story of the ending of World War II, when the Holocaust came to an end, as well as that terrible war. A quarter of a century ago, I was given the Eisenhower Liberation Medal in the rotunda of the Capitol, presented by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council. I accepted it on behalf of the GIs who liberated the concentration camps back in 1945, especially the 4th Armored Division, the first one to do it when it entered the camp at Ohrdruf. The GIs say they stopped in their tracks. They couldn't believe what they saw. As one GI said, the whole camp is a pyre. It was a big pit where they had stacked bodies and wood, and burned them. I guess I'll never, never forget the ashes I saw that day. Generals Eisenhower, Bradley, and Patton rushed to see it for themselves. Upon entering the camp through the smell of death, Eisenhower turned pale and silent. But he wanted to see everything. He wanted to see the whole camp. He wanted to be a witness to this horror. General Patton, that great combat leader, went behind a barracks and threw up. General Bradley recalled it all. Eisenhower later that day reported to Washington, "I can state unequivocally that all written statements up to now do not paint the full horrors. For most of it, I have no words." Time must never be allowed to remove the history and to remove these events from our memories. We must never forget as my beloved friend, your beloved friend, Elie Wiesel, used to remind us all every time I saw him. And we're so honored to have Marion here with us this evening, my darling. It's a pleasure to see you. The war ended, and 3 years later, the Jewish people were given their own country. At midnight, May 14th, 1948, the State of Israel was declared. 11 minutes later, President Truman recognized the new state in a sentence that only had 6 lines to it, really 2 paragraphs, 3 lines each. At the end of the 6th line, it had been typed in, "New Jewish State." Truman took a pen and scratched that out and put in handwriting, which is in the official document, the State of Israel. There would be no mistaking of his decision and of his vision. There has been no weakening of that decision, and no weakening of the vision that he had in the intervening 69 years. The vision and prophecy of Theodor Herzl has become real so many years after his death. And America's dedication, America's alliance, and America's support of the democratic state of Israel has never wavered, and it never will. I was only 11 years old in 1948, and I can tell you I still remember the day. I remember the day because it meant so much to my neighbors in that block of the South Bronx that I lived in. I had been born in Harlem, but now lived on that block of diversity in the South Bronx. My parents were Jamaican immigrants working in the garment industry along with all of my other relatives. The Puerto Ricans owned the bodegas. There was a Chinese laundry, an Italian shoemaker, an Irish laundromat. You name it, we had it on Kelly Street. But the block was anchored by Jews. I remember all their names. On one corner was Kaiserman's Bakery. On another was Teitelbaum's drugstore. A toy store was on another, and a small storefront synagogue was on the 4th corner, where I proudly served as a Sabbath goy. A kosher market, chicken market, was around the corner, and Lowenstein's candy store was around another corner. A few corners away was Sixer's juvenile furniture store, where I would later serve for years as a part-time schlepper, and where I would thankfully pick up some Yiddish, which has served me so well over the last 60 years. I can't tell all my Yiddish stories, or we'd be here all night, but it was so much fun to pick up some Yiddish and use it in the store. And one of the proudest moments I've ever had is when Mr. Sixer took me aside one day after I'd been working there part-time for years, and he put his arm around me and he said, Collie, I want you should know. Collie was a Yiddish diminutive. I want you should know, the store will go to my daughters and to my son-in-laws. There's no future for you here. I want you should get your education and move on. And I said, thank you, Jay. And I never had any intention of staying in the store, but that wasn't the point. He thought enough of me, and he loved me enough to give me that advice that day. He passed on, the store was sold, family moved away. The son-in-law, who was the last owner of the store, ended up down around Palm Beach. The store did well, what can I tell you? Mock the Geld. I mean, again. And when I became National Security Advisor to President Reagan, my picture appeared in a newspaper, and it showed up, this paper, in Palm Beach. And Lou Kirshner, the son-in-law, saw the picture. And he said, that's the kid. That's the kid which we made. We made him National Security. They then reconnected with me, and I stayed in touch with Lou and his new wife for the rest of their lives. And every time I was in Palm Beach, at the Breakers, for example, I would call Lou and ask him over, and we'd sit in the lobby of the Breakers, and as people walked by, he would grab them. Hey, meet my friend Powell. But going back to the South Bronx, the greatest experience we had there from our Jewish neighbors was the Klein family on the bottom of my tenement building. They had the only TV in that building or for several buildings around. Yet on Tuesday evening, all the kids in the neighborhood could go to the Kleins and watch the Goldbergs in Milton Berle. The next day, 15 May, 1948, pandemonium broke out. There was joy throughout the neighborhood. Tears flowed, celebrations everywhere. And it wasn't just the Jewish who were celebrating, the rest of us were celebrating for the Jews. We all shared in their joy, the joy of having a homeland. They might not be the ones to go back and set up this homeland, but their heart was there, and they would do everything they could to support this new state of Israel. Fascinating piece of history, but 2 months later, in July of 1948, President Truman boldly and courageously signed another historic document that would directly affect me and so many others. By executive order, he ordered the armed forces of the United States to desegregate its units. A black soldier was ordained to be equal in every way to a white soldier. Complete desegregation did not occur for another 6 years. And 6 years later, in 1954, the Supreme Court ordered that schools should be desegregated. It was also the year that I entered the City College of New York up in Harlem, and I joined ROTC. 4 years later, I entered the Army as an infantry lieutenant. At that time, the Army was the most socially progressive institution in the nation. They made it clear to me that if I performed and showed potential, I would move up. If I didn't, I wouldn't. It was simple as that. They didn't care that I was a black. They didn't care that I was a public school kid from New York City or an immigrant kid, a family of limited means. All they said was, do your best, show potential, and we'll move up. Extremely progressive. That was all I could ask for. The years passed, and rapidly, I did move up. I came to know and admire fellow soldiers in the Israeli Defense Force. I came to understand the commitment of blood we had with Israel. I was a student of the wars of 1948, 1956, 1967, 1973, and as an American professional soldier, I marvel at the professionalism and the successes of the Israeli Defense Forces. In 1988, I met Yitzhak Rabin, a great soldier. He was now the Minister of Defense, and he had come to Washington to see President Reagan. An intifada had started and violence roiled the streets of Israel. I was the Deputy National Security Advisor to President Reagan. Waiting with Mr. Rabin, Minister Rabin, in the Situation Room, I asked him as a fellow soldier how the IDF was going to deal with kids throwing rocks and not Arab armies. He looked at me, he took out a cigarette, lit it, started smoking, and he wasn't sure, he said. I asked him what the final solution would be, what would the ultimate solution be? And he just uttered one word, peace. We need peace. I was also present on the South Lawn of the White House as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff a few years later, September 1993, as now Prime Minister Rabin signed an historic agreement with PLO Chairman Yasser Arafat to pursue peace. And I will remember forever the night Rabin the warrior, Rabin the peacemaker, was assassinated. The quest for peace continues, however difficult the task. I did my part as Secretary of State, as have my predecessors and my successors. The quest, however difficult, must not be abandoned. Israel needs to live in peace and security. The Palestinians need the same, as does the region. And the world knows that the challenge ahead will be difficult, but it must be met, it must be pursued. I remember vividly my last meeting with Yasser Arafat in 2001. We were in his headquarters, the Makata in Ramallah. I was escorted there by Israeli security and turned over to Palestinian security and went into the building. Israel had isolated the building, no water, no electricity. It was a pretty awful place. I went into the building and we met over candles and lanterns with an AK-47 behind every Palestinian in the room. After a long and wandering conversation, I told Arafat that I was the only one in the 43 administration, George W. Bush's administration, who would see him and deal with him unless he gave me something to work with. I told him this could be our last meeting. He jumped up and said, "You are a general, I am a general, I will obey." I knew then it would be our last meeting because he was again lying and he would do nothing. He led a movement but could not politically lead a people or a nation. I never saw him again. There is a fragile, still dangerous element of stability in the region today, but what is needed is peace, and that can only be obtained by the parties themselves. The pursuit is not helped by international actions and resolutions singling out Israel for economic attacks, for human rights allegations, while ignoring despotic nations far more deserving of condemnation. That is not justice, and that is not acceptable. The challenges faced by Jews around the world are not just focused on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Anti-Semitism has never gone away. In fact, in recent years, we have seen the rise of far-right political movements around the world that are tolerant of anti-Semitic speech and actions. Here in our own country, there has been an increase or rise in anti-Semitic behavior. The ADL reports that here at home, there was a 34% increase in anti-Semitic incidents in 2016 compared to 2015, and an 86% increase in the first quarter of 2017. As Secretary of State in 2004, I attended a conference in Berlin of 55 nations convened to deal with anti-Semitism. In my remarks at that conference, I said that we had come to stamp out new fires of anti-Semitism within our societies and to kindle lights of tolerance so that the future generations will never know the unspeakable horrors that hatred can unleash. The fires still burn, and the ugly realities still exist. Fueled by anonymous social media and empowered by bigots and haters, it results in a breakdown in our standards of tolerance and civil discourse. And it is not just about Jews. It is happening to many different colors in our American rainbow. The world is watching and wondering, what happened to E pluribus unum? If each of us remains silent and just tends to our own little fate, the nation will suffer. Nothing is more important than teaching our children in our homes and in our schools the importance of tolerance and respect for every fellow American, regardless of race, religion, ethnicity, wealth, gender, birthplace, sexuality, or any other characteristics. Each of us came into the world, as our founding fathers said, with an endowment from a Creator who gave to each of us unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we need to stop screaming at each other and insulting each other. Shortly after the Cold War ended and the Soviet Union was gone, I was at a conference with my dear friend, former Prime Minister Shimon Peres. We were both now out of office. We celebrated the flow of Jews from out behind the Iron Curtain and the Falashas from Africa. But we couldn't quite reconcile the changes we saw in this new world order. Shimon, after a few minutes of conversation, he reached over and he's put his arm around my shoulder. He said, "Oi, Colin, oi. We've lost our enemies, and now all we have are problems. We have found some new enemies, but none present an existential threat to us as the Soviet Union did. But we really have found lots of new and vexing problems. Yet problems are there to be solved. America is expected to lead, not to withdraw. America is expected to lead the world to the solution of these problems and not to pull back into the United States from across the oceans. The world is also counting on dedicated people such as here tonight and represented by the World Jewish Congress to be on guard, to find and resist intolerance, hatred, and evil, to help find peace, prosperity, and to provide the opportunity for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all. The World Jewish Congress has been working on this successfully for 79 years, and I am confident the Congress will continue doing so far and as long as this is necessary. You are doing essential work, and I bless you for what you have done, and I bless you for being here tonight. Shalom.